Please take this opportunity to silence your cell phones. We will begin momentarily. Please welcome Amy Wallace, Head of App Directory at Slack.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy. I lead our App Directory team here at Slack. And I'm really excited to be with you today to talk about how to build a business on Slack. I'm joined today by 3 founders who are here to tell us about their own first-hand experience of building an app and a business on Slack. So welcome to you all. Could you tell us who you are and what your business does?
Hi, everybody. I'm Roman. I'm co-founder of Workstreams.ai. Workstreams.ai is a task management application which cuts the administration overhead and empowers great modern teams to get amazing things done with less overhead.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Wadcan. I'm co-founder of Eventbot. Eventbot is a calendar that's built into your Slack channels. So you can create events in Slack or pull in calendars from Trello, Meetup, or Google Calendar. We've been around for 2 years, and we're excited to talk to you about some of our tactics today.
Cool. I'm Jeremy. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Disco. Disco is a tool that helps you celebrate and recognize your coworkers all within Slack. We've been building on the platform for 5 years now. So I'm one of the OGs. Happy to share my experiences with you all today.
Amazing. Thank you all for being here. So when it comes to building a business on Slack, we've learned a lot from the developer community over the last few years, and we're here to share that with you. So we're going to explore 3 areas that are vital to thinking about when you're building your business. We'll first talk about prototyping and developing, where it's vital to get to know your customers really well, building feedback loops so that you can understand how they're using the product and how you can improve it for them to make sure you're building a high-quality app to meet their needs. We'll then dive into, obviously, once you've built your app, you want to share it with people. So we'll go into the go-to-market section, where we can talk about how you build out a great app directory listing to engage your core audience, going further than that, building a great landing page, and even going into an onboarding experience, how to engage customers once they've installed your app, and then further on, engaging them further once they've started using and onboarding your app. And then as promised, this is about building a business. So we're going to talk about monetization strategy. We'll talk about how you can experiment with pricing, making sure that you talk about different pricing strategies, the different incentives and language needed to convey the value of your app to the customers using it and the key decision makers who will be purchasing your app for their workspaces and teams. And as a quick note to those of you in the audience who may be building internally for your own organizations, a lot of this content will still be relevant. We'll be talking about building customer feedback loops and selling the value of your app to key decision makers. So a lot of this content will still be relevant. We're going to go through each of these sections with one of our founders, and then we'll come together at the end for a roundtable discussion and a few quick-fire questions at the end. So without further ado, let's jump into our first section. Welcome, Roman. Could you tell us how you got started with Workstreams?
Right. That was an interesting one, because the story of Workstreams actually started even before the Workstream started. And it kind of snowballed with experience working in the small startups, the startups growing, and we always had a great feeling while being in the same room all together, having a simple Kanban board where everybody can see what's going on right now, and having no communication overhead, not context switching, which was amazing, and we wanted to keep it even when the startups were scaling and growing and becoming more distributed. Yet at that point, all the tools which were out there always required switching between notifications in email and switching to administration through admins, and everything was disconnected. And Then I went traveling, and a half year later I came back, and one of my friends got in touch saying, listen, I have a great idea. Maybe we could actually find a way how to build on Slack, which now provides a lot of tools, how you can build applications and cut this overhead. Use the administration of the memberships from the channels and the users and link it all together. So for each channel you get a Kanban board and you can do the interactions directly in Slack, or you can have the visual overview on the board. Well, and that's how we started.
Amazing. And so when you decided to work on Workstreams, building this tool for yourself and solving the problems you were facing, how did you decide what to build first?
Right, so we had certain presumptions, but the world has changed, and I think it's not really a great idea to work only based on your assumptions. So there was a strong product research in the beginning, and based on this product research, we listed a couple of key things which we wanted to deliver as a really, really MVP. And out of that, we went out and talked to the same people, showed them the product, let them to see and how it works, see how they test it, how they interact with it. Did a little bit of qualitative research on that, a couple of iterations, and then we launched it to directory and continued in the similar way.
Amazing. And so you talked there about the idea of talking to people, seeing how they're using it, getting a real sense of how customers are using your product. What's the fastest way that you found to get feedback as you were building?
Right, I think it's very, very important to distinguish between the qualitative feedback and quantitative feedback. You can always have loads of different analytics which gives you information about the usage of certain features, but it doesn't tell you anything about what do people feel when they interact with your application. So most of our features which we work on are being developed in a very simple way, that we have a prototype, go through the user testing session where usually you need 5 to 7 testers to discover 75% of the usability issues. And then when we get a couple of iterations on that, we might repeat it, sometimes not, and then we launch it from the alpha to the beta tier. And then we actually we have more quantitative data on top of that, which helps us to see whether the usage is as we expected or it's not. And then it's sometimes important to make a sharp turn left or right and change the direction.
I love that idea of using different techniques to collect different qualitative feedback and information from your customers. How did you collect that feedback?
Right, so when we started, we were actually very lucky because we were incubated in the company, which had roughly 50 people spread around a couple of offices in Germany, and 20 people were sitting with us in one office, and everybody actually was with us on the same boat, and they started using the product from the early phase, so we had a chance to talk to each other, which was really, really a huge advantage. From a certain point when we needed to get beyond that, we started by adding simple feedback loop inside of the application itself, having within the web application, having option for the people to request what features they would like to see, provide a feature ratings, so we actually see that, okay, this might be good, this might not be good enough, and then with introduction of the shared channels, it actually went to a little bit different scale, because with the shared channels, we were able to talk to our customers directly on the platform where we build. And it went from, okay, feature request plus showing how the feature actually works, collecting the ideas, and going deeper into how it could move further. And it was well accepted from the customer side, and for us, it provides always a strong knowledge base and a strong point of reference, saying, okay, if you need to talk to UX about how this feature should look like, you just point to this channel, to that communication, and the UX people can talk directly to the customers. So it really brings the cross-collaboration between the companies and the product into different level.
I love that idea of really building bridges between your internal teams who are building the product and your customers using a shared channel so they can communicate directly. So it sounds like you collected a lot of feedback. What's maybe one piece that made you rethink your app entirely?
One. It's always difficult to pick one, so if you allow me, maybe I would pick two, because they were coming in a really, really high frequency, and they actually were causing certain trouble. So, but I think the highest on the scale would be the problem of the cluttering of the channels. So you can see there is actually our original full view message can take quite a lot of space. If you add a lot of attachments and you have a lot of description inside, plus all the action menus, it can easily clog the channel and the communications becomes lost in it. So with the release of Blockade and of the overflow menu, we are able to provide the controls for the users to choose between different format of the message. And they could choose between the full one, which is like really you are in control, you see all the details, to basic one, you have the context of what's happening right now, and you are still able to take an action straight away, to really minimalistic, where you see, okay, this is where it stands, and if I need to interact, I expand it, or I click edit button like straight from the overflow menu, and I make the change, but it doesn't clog the channels that much. And the second, which was also very, very valuable and made a lot of difference, was being over-notified. It's always very challenging to find a balance of what is the right amount of notifications and who you should notify how often. So that was something which we actually needed some time to experiment with, and how we addressed that was looking under the hood, and instead of using user mentions, replacing in certain situations, replacing the user mentions with user links, which still provide a lot of context about who did what. So I'm talking specifically about the thread, because the thread is for us a changelog. And instead of saying, hey, somebody just updated a title or description, and mentioning them, that means all the further messages on the thread, those people get notified. We replaced those locations with just the user links. And that made a huge difference. So these two were really, really the most valuable, and helped to deliver a solution which doesn't over-notify, doesn't clog, and keeps the people in the control.
Perfect. I love that. And I love that the combination of listening to your customers and finding solutions in the Slack API features meant that you could give your customers the option based on what they needed at the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so we've just learned about how you can build your app and learn from your customers along the way. And obviously, your app isn't much without customers. So now we will join Joe to learn about our go-to-market strategy. So could you tell us how you got started building Eventbot?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Amy. We started Eventbot. So this is probably our 4th calendar startup, so we really like calendars. But Eventbot is a project that actually started as an event discovery service. And when we brought it to Slack, we found a lot of feedback was really centered around doing more with calendars inside of Slack. And so what we built is a native calendar for Slack specifically. And we've had a lot of bumps along the way to getting traction. I think in the beginning, we first started out with going to the app directory. And that was probably one of our best decisions early on. We had less than 100 users at the time, so we were really nervous about putting anything out in the app directory. But it was a really consistent source of installs for us. And with those installs, we can get feedback, we can iterate on the product. And it really led to the product that we have today. And throughout the time, we've been iterating on our feedback, our app directory listing. There's 2 things that really just helped us out. We specifically made sure we had keywords that folks were looking for, so when they're searching, they come up with the listing. And when they get to that listing, they actually see the photos that can show them the value of the app without having going through the install steps. Those are the biggest things in the beginning to get some traction.
Amazing. And I'm biased, but I think a great app directory listing is a great thing to have. Yeah. One of the things I love about your team also is that you've invested in your blog posts. How does that feed into your discovery and how it's impacted your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So the blog itself is a really core part of how our business works. We started out just blogging about product features and launches like most folks do. And we started to realize that folks also were interested to hear about the choices that we were making and the decisions we made as a company. And as we did that, we decided to move our Eventbot blog from Medium to our own domain. And that really kind of helped us juice the search engine rankings for our actual content. And one of the specific blog posts that really ended up catching fire was this post, which is not at all about our features. It was about how we decided to donate 3% of our revenue to the open source projects that we rely on. And this got some traction in Hacker News, and then it went kind of wide and far. And that did 2 things for us. One, it gave us a sizable amount of installs for that day, which was nice. But kind of more importantly, it gave us a permanent boost to our search rankings. And so today, our #1 source of installs is still organic search. And our blog posts are part of how we get that into the door.
Amazing. And it sounds like that was something that surprised you. Is there any other go-to-market tactic that you found that also surprised you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We experiment with all sorts of crazy ideas. Being a small team, we kind of like that we were able to do that. One tactic that worked that I actually did want to talk about publicly is really working with large public Slack workspaces. I think this is kind of an untapped area. So we worked with #gaming, which is a 10,000-person public interest Slack. And if they were to use Eventbot on our premium plans, they would just be extremely expensive. So we decided to work with them directly and just give it away. And what we found is that Slack users from that workspace would bring us into other workspaces they were in. So they would bring us into their workplace Slack because they had seen it work. They've already experienced it before. And that to us has been a really big growth driver.
So it sounds like you've really been building ways to connect with your users through the blog and through other sources and open source, bigger Slack teams. How important, when we go beyond the top of the funnel, is onboarding for discovery and for engaging your users?
Yeah, in our minds, onboarding is make or break. I mean, if you do all that work to get someone to click the button, install your app, and you don't engage them and activate them, it's kind of a wasted opportunity. So for us, we know that we have this limited window to talk to installers. And like Smokefos, we send a welcome DM. And that kind of gives you a little bit of insight into what you're supposed to do next. At Eventbot, we send instructions to basically send for the users to give /command/events. That is our core activation event. And if folks can do that, they're much more likely to stick with us. And one of the things we found is that some folks are just not used to /commands. I think some of the features that were demoed here today will help with that. But specifically, we wanted to give folks as much help as we could. So we made this little GIF that showed people where to type the /command, clicking enter, what they should see afterwards. And this kind of helped us reduce the number of support tickets, but also help users help themselves. And at every step, we'd give them some FAQ articles, which serve two purposes. One, it helped the users kind of unlock. And two, again, help that search engine ranking. So it helped the top of the funnel, too.
Amazing. And I love that the way you're thinking about it is how to make sure that your customers understand how to engage with your app and how to use it. So once they've onboarded and they're using the app successfully, how do you keep them engaged?
Yeah, this is a challenge for any app, I think. As a calendar, we do a lot of things around reminders and specific events. But I think something that's publicly useful for everyone is we started doing a newsletter via DM. So we would send folks a DM that would talk about what we did that month, new features, maybe changes to the pricing. And this is a really valuable way for users to remember that you still exist. And I should be super clear that we do not spam users. I highly, highly discourage you from doing that. So we only send a DM to people who've engaged with Eventbot before. So we're not spamming the whole workspace. But also, we have a big old unsubscribe button right there in the middle. And we were nervous when we put that out there. We thought we would lose installs. We thought it would be like 20% unsubscribe rate. And we found that it was less than 2% and had been dropping. So for our perspective, we were helping users remind us about what we can do. And on the business side, half of our paid trials started from this DM. So it became a huge driver for the business as well as usage and growth.
Amazing. And I love that consideration from your customer's perspective. They probably are busy. They don't want to be spammed. So you're making sure that you're contacting only those active users. Yeah. And that unsubscribe button, super helpful. You also have another button there called Upgrade Eventbot. Could you tell us a little bit about how you decided which features that you would have available for free and paid?
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge again. For a calendar, it's even more of a challenge because all of our competitors are free. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what we make free and what we can actually charge for to build a business. We actually used a blog post from Disco. I think it was Justin at Disco. And it talked about how you can use features that are specifically intended for growth and maybe making those free, while other features that are value add might be those that people are willing to pay for. And that's been a good balance for us. And we continue to kind of change that and iterate, but that's a good guiding line.
Amazing. It's an excellent segue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Onto monetization. So as we promised, we're going to talk about pricing strategy as well, so that once you've built and iterated on your product and you've found your customer base, how do you make sure that you're building the right pricing strategy to engage your customers? So Jeremy, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about Disco and how you convey your value to your customers?
Yeah, so it's an honor to be here. I think there's so much good advice being shared on this panel. I'll say my biggest takeaway for the audience is experiment and figure out what works for you. Especially in Joe's case, I can say this because he's talking about a blog my brother wrote. Don't take advice from Justin unless you really, really trust him. But yeah, so we've been in the platform for 5 years since it launched, actually. And what Disco is it's a tool that really helps you celebrate and scale your culture through real-time recognition of living your core values inside of Slack. So our whole thesis has been, let's be where the conversation is happening, where the work is actually happening, making it that much easier to celebrate and socialize when one of your coworkers or peers lives a core value. And we take all of that engagement. We've built kind of a socialized engine on top of it using Slack's reactions and a lot of other block kit functionality to make it hyper engaging and push that to other places like office displays, dashboards, places that you would expect. And you know, our first big bet was, do we have a product that solves a problem? So pricing has always been really, really critical for us, both validating that people will actually use this thing, and then people will actually pay for this thing. So we've always looked at pricing as something as equally as important as the product to figure out. And I think my biggest piece of advice to everybody here is, it's not one size fits all, and it's something that you should experiment quite a bit. For us, we launched as a freemium product. So from the get-go, you could have a free suite of features similar to Eventbot, and then hopefully once you got enough value, you would upgrade. We found that we were such a small team, we were kind of trying to build 2 products at once, so we actually transitioned to a paid-only plan. And that was kind of a scary experience for us, because we felt like, you know, we're going to lose all this traffic. Again, in the app directory, we get, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of installs a month just by being listed there. So being very thoughtful about how people, their first impression of you makes a big difference, to Joe's point. But then we learned very early on that we need to align ourselves with what our customers are actually buying. And we only get value when our customers are actually using the product. They only get value when their employees are actually using it. So we now are charging per active user. So for everybody that uses it, you only pay for those folks, not your entire organization. So it's definitely been a journey. It's something that's kind of evolved along the way, and I'm sure it will continue to evolve as the space matures.
You touched there on the idea of building a relationship with your customers and getting to know them and making sure that you're providing them with value. One of the things that you have now is a contact us button rather than a traditional public pricing page. Can you tell us a bit more about how you arrived at that decision?
Yeah, I think, you know, so much of, especially in the Valley, it's all about scale. Like, how quickly can you scale? And, you know, you want to raise money and you want to, you know, basically like hide behind your application almost, especially early on. It can be scary to get that feedback, to put yourself out there, especially when so many people are telling you, hey, this is too expensive, or you're going to get all kinds of feedback. So it's really important, I think, to kind of push against that and, one, show that there's actual people behind these applications. Like, that's incredibly important to build a relationship, especially if you're asking them to pay, you know, a pretty sizable amount of money for the services that you provide. And 2, just being really dialed into what your customers expect. So for us, you know, a lot of our buyers expect to talk to somebody. They want to build a relationship. They want to know that you're going to be there if something goes wrong, and it will. Like, we're all, or most of us are startups, so like things are on fire constantly. But when you take the time to show them there's a person behind it and build that relationship, it can go a long way. And it's going to just break down a lot of walls. It's going to allow them to give you the real feedback that they're thinking versus what they think you want to hear. So it's incredibly important to basically put yourself out there, especially as you're still learning and scaling.
Amazing. And so you mentioned the idea of like experimenting and that you've learned a lot along the way. What's one piece of advice you might offer our audience today as they're thinking about their own monetization strategy?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and you'll see this on the screenshot here, is this is still a journey for us. We're learning every day. Just recently, we actually totally removed pricing from our landing page, and when you click pricing, you now get a chat window that says, like, basically, how big is your company and what do you want to use Disco for? And it's definitely an experiment, but it's proving really well. I was terrified when we launched it, because you know, you expect every piece of friction you put in the funnel, it's going to just remove, you know, qualified leads. But we actually found the opposite, that we saw 30% increase in quality leads when we could explain the value that Disco provides. And obviously, you want your landing page to do as much of that as possible, but you know, pricing and sticker shock is also a real thing. So being able to understand who that person is, what problem they're solving, how qualified they are, as much as you can learn about them as possible, as early as possible, is going to lead to success for your business. But I think the one key takeaway for the audience for me is treat pricing, treat go-to-market as an experiment, and don't be afraid to, try new things, price yourself probably 2 or 3 times higher than you think you should, and get the hard feedback. Put yourself out there, let them know there's a person behind this application that's being built, and just grit it out. It's a journey, but you can come out the other side for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So now we're going to go to our roundtable. We have a few questions just for the whole panel to answer. One of the things that all 3 of you have mentioned is the idea of learning and what you've learned along the way. So what is something that you wish you'd known before you started building?
Okay, well, it might sound harsh, but I didn't know how many people actually do not read and do not write. So there was example in Joe's GIF, and the use of the backticks for text highlighting of / command. And we had once a promotion on the Slack directory. They always delivers loads of new installations, and you always want to find out, okay, how did they activate, where did it end, and why it didn't activate. And we've learned that 70% of users, when they see some text, they just copy and paste. So that's quite crucial, especially what was mentioned, that the installer is the gateway to the whole team. If the installer's experience doesn't work, it doesn't go any further. So that was something which really surprised us, and I wished I knew it before, because you can live in unknown for quite a while until you realize that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a cute logo. That's my advice. No, so one of the things I think is actually very useful is we didn't realize the breadth of customers that we would actually find when building for Slack. We thought it was just going to be mostly tech companies. And in reality, we found that folks from a Waffle House in Atlanta to a church in Sao Paulo are all using Eventbot for different reasons. And I think that kind of insight would have helped us decide what features to build, and in turn, what kind of business we're building as well.
So I think for me, it's be creative. So in Joe's case, you should definitely barter and get free waffles for life instead of charging for your app. On a serious note, I think for us, it was when we were building, we felt like we needed to do all things for all people in the HR space for feedback. And when we really started getting traction, when we said, screw that, we're just going to do one thing and do it really well. And that was when it was so much easier to explain our value proposition for users to understand what we were trying to get them to do, because you only have so much of their time, their bandwidth. They're trying to get their job done, and for us, we're trying to sprinkle a little delight in there. So just be crystal clear on what you want to do, especially if you're early on, and keep it simple and build value over time.
So one thing you said there, Jeremy, that was interesting was do one thing and do one thing really well. And another thing we've talked about is experimenting and building feedback loops and iterating. So when do you know when something's good enough? When do you stop iterating? When do you ship?
I mean, for us, we dark ship stuff all the time. So we put a new feature behind a / command that no one knows, and then we reach out to those users who request it and ask them for feedback live in production. And what we do is we iterate a ton from that. And I think we've found that we know when good enough happens because the feedback will start to change. The feedback will go from, oh, this thing would be great if some kind of secondary add-on feature that they'd want us to build. And when we see that happening, then we realize, all right, it's time to open this up for the wider audience, and then we can take feedback from everyone and then prioritize after that.
Yeah, I think for us, we take a similar approach, except opposite. We ship pretty early and to most people, and that's always been a good way for us to just get as many eyeballs on something as early as possible. And I think we're allowed to do that because of how narrow our focus is. We want to make it really easy to celebrate your coworkers. So a lot of our changes are more subtle. So once you hit a certain point of scale, you can use data to make a lot of those decisions. But if you're making big sweeping changes, for sure, be smart about when you get it out there and to how many eyeballs. For us, we started applying a little bit more of measurement to when something's good enough. And I think, especially early on, we had this big question of, do we have product market fit? And there was this article I stumbled upon. I said I would source it when we were talking live, but I didn't. So I'll send it to you maybe. But it basically says, how many people, you measure your audience and ask them how many people would be pissed off if your app goes away. And if 40% of them say, my life would be forever changed in a bad way, then you've got something really magical. So that was kind of our true north at a more meta scale as to how we decided or landed upon this is solving a real problem. But ultimately, given the track of our talk, people also need to pay money for it. So will they use it? Do they like it? And will they put money down, depending on your business model?
I really like the question because it doesn't talk about being perfect. It just says good enough for now, and it always gives a space to evolve further. So I think along the both lines of Jeremy and Joe, you get the feeling from getting the feedback from the closest circle and from quantitative data around, is the usage growing, or can people imagine not having this feature? And also sometimes not being afraid of saying no to people which maybe are not really in the right segment of what you are trying to deliver, because you cannot really please all people all the time. But if somebody requested some basic functionality and keeps adding, okay, now actually I want this to do something completely different, well, okay, great, that actually already delivered what it was supposed to deliver, and you want something on top. We can think about it, but let's ship it further. But what we try to usually do is to get the feedback from the people who requested it, and work on it for a while. Use it internally, see whether it actually makes any sense. And within both Slack and the web application, we try to provide a rating, so the people can actually give us a rating on the 1 to 5 stars on certain features, and also write what is not working for them or what would be their expectations. And sometimes it's really surprising that things we didn't expect at all can be achieved by the feature which we just released. One example can be people taking screenshots of my tasks view, because the management wanted to know whether they are utilized the best way. So they requested team tasks, just to have a quick, transparent overview of who is working on what. And that gave a power to a completely new feature which we launched further, because it's very important to know what is your boss doing and knowing that you are empowered to see it.
I love that. And all three of you, the theme comes back to listening to your customers and the customer getting to know how they're using your app and how they're using your features, whether that's by releasing it to everyone at once or by releasing it just to a few people. Great. And so the three of you are really experts on building on Slack. So not only are you building businesses, but you're building businesses on Slack. What insights have you developed about building your businesses on Slack specifically?
Sure. I think how to summarize, all of 5 years into one sentence. I think two things. One is just speaks to the directory and the audience that Slack has built, the community. People are really pulling for solutions to be solved, and for us that's so exciting, because you're going to get a lot of excited people who want to break your product, basically, who they want to play around with it, they want to use it, they want to pay for it, because you're solving a problem for them. So just not losing sight of that fact, that the opportunity that Slack has bestowed upon third-party developers is really cool. And related to that, something we had to learn pretty early, we took a lot of that excitement. We're building a company, our users are excited. We felt like we needed to insert ourselves as much as possible, basically. Especially because we're disco, we're fun, we have, I think, a pretty cool brand. It took us a while to learn that we're solving a problem for our customer, but it's not their whole day. So finding that right balance of how do you build your brand within Slack, how do you make delightful interactions while not being not just disruptive, but distracting. So I think Roman and Joe did incredible jobs of giving the user the ability to customize how many messages they see, or Joe not spamming while still getting people to engage with updates and blogs and content and stuff. So just being thoughtful about the job your users want you to solve for them, and using that real estate to still build your brand while letting them get the job done.
I think that there was a couple of key learnings while building for users, and those users maybe at some point becoming customers, and it's along the line of the installer and the power of the team acquisition. So the classic SaaS software, you have people giving you email, and after that email, you have one user you can talk to, and you don't have any more. And then you need to convince that user needs to convince somebody else, invite them, which works. But in Slack, it works different way. You have the installer, he still has a really, really strong role of adopting, and you have a strong challenge of convincing that this tool actually delivers something new, and that's what you've been looking for. But then this installer, all he has to do is to invite the bot to a certain channel, and the same story can repeat, and the acquisition can be way faster. And you gain a lot of feedback through acquiring new people and enabling them to talk to you back. So that is, I think, one key takeaway. And the second is along the Jeremy's line about the variety of Slack users. So it really goes down from a church newspaper publishers to through IBM teams, as there is thousands of them. It's not one, but they are separated and they're all in control of what they can install. Landing in the world of HR, marketing, sales, and even though you developed solution for IT in the first place, it's being adopted by those all those people who never heard about Agile, and they are in their mindset way more Agile than people with the Agile background. I mean, by theory. So that really, really is inspiring, to actually see that, hey, people like to get their stuff done and enjoy the life and cut the communication overhead, because everybody wants to see what's happening right now on this topic.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the harder insights we had to learn was being really mindful of the frame of reference that people are coming to from Slack. So for a calendar company like us, people are used to being able to see a grid of boxes and click and be able to create that user experience. And we can't directly translate that to Slack. So we had to be mindful and understand, what can we do? And then we had to be really creative. We had to figure out, if we can't, have a full palette UI, what can we do that gets us half the way there, or partially there? And so what we did at Eventbot is we take a snapshot. So we will take a snapshot as an image of your weekly calendar, post it back to the channel. And we thought that would be, something that could use it, something that users could, really use. And we found that it became a banner feature. It's the one feature that people really, really like, to be able to see that calendar up front. And so I think really being mindful of where you start from and what users are expecting, and then translating that with some creativity into Slack is just really helpful.
Amazing. And so you mentioned creativity, and I think that's one thing that is a stream that goes through all three of your answers, is using Slack API features creatively. And we just have a few minutes, so I'd like to throw a bonus question out there for you. Jeremy, you mentioned you've been building on the platform for 5 years, right? So we've come a long way in 5 years, as Brian said this morning. We still have a way to go. If you had one wishlist item for the next 5 years from Slack API, what would it be?
Go ahead. Yeah.
In the spirit of building a business, I think a lot of our customers are actually really. So first of all, I think there's been so much great work done on the end user side of things that it's allowed us to really make a robust experience all within Slack. And I think what gets me excited after talking to our customers as well is they want help, figuring out how do we pay for this? How do we have to not go through a whole separate procurement process if it's already contained within Slack? So for us, thinking about that funnel, basically, and making it super easy for third parties to kind of draft off a lot of the great work that Slack has done within so many of these enterprises would be huge. So to summarize, I think the payments infrastructure is stuff that I'm really excited to see over the next 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've got a laundry list of short-term features. Analytics on app directory listings, come on, let's make that happen. I think if I'm looking 5 years out, wild-eyed, what could that be? I'd actually like Slack to be a little bit more interconnected. I think that the shared channels is a really good way to bridge these workspaces, but they're still essentially walled gardens. So I think if I were 5 years out thinking about what I'd like there to be more of a public Slack, or at least the infrastructure to handle a lot of users talking at once, which I don't think is possible now, but I think in the future would be a really huge upgrade to what Slack can be used for.
From my perspective, I'm coming from a really technical background, and it's not an issue to implement integration against this service or that service, but there's a lot of non-technical users, and Workflow Builder is actually making really great direction that, hey, you are able to set up something like if this, then that on Slack. So I'm not going to be talking about granular permissions because they've been announced today, and I've talked about them for 2 years, so I'm great that they are there. The actions replacing the / commands for the non-tech people, they are there, so for me, the wish would be the event event-based driven ecosystem where the apps can talk to each other behind the scenes, while the user being in control of what should talk to who about, or to what, about what content, based on what topic. So the people actually can really focus on the communication and seeing the results out of the communication being orchestrated by AI and services behind the scenes. So if we can get there, then I believe then those 2,000 apps in directory will become really, really strong ecosystem of interconnected web like mushrooms.
Amazing. We're all taking notes backstage, getting down to work. Thank you all so much for being here. Just to recap, the 3 things that we talked about today, main topics, were how you can prototype and develop your app iteratively by building customer feedback loops, collecting your customer feedback early and often, using shared channels as a way to communicate directly with your customers. And we talked about go-to-market, so thinking about the full funnel, so not just acquisition, but all the way through to onboarding, making sure that the people who are installing your apps have a great experience and then continue to remain engaged. And then, of course, we touched on monetization and building out your pricing strategy, where you can also experiment, but remember to prioritize your relationship with your customer to make sure that you're conveying the value your product will give to them. So that's it from us. Thank you so much for being here with us. The panel and I will be around for the rest of the day, so feel free to come up and say hi and ask questions. I know these 3 would be very happy to answer any of the questions about their experience building. There's going to be a short break before the next session, but feel free to mill around and then come back for the next session. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.